Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the air conditioning. I'm kind of glad they scheduled the lecture today. I don't have to be on shore. Sweating. Quoted by Time magazine as the person of the 20th century. The quote there from Time, greatest mind and paramount icon of our age. And there he is, from 1879 to 1955. His name is synonymous with being genius, and I think in probably generations to come, we may add another name to that too. Stephen Hawking will probably be synonymous with genius in time to come. But anyway, right now, Einstein holds sway for the last century. We're going to look at various aspects of his life here. I'll start with the early years, and I'm going to move quite quickly through this because Einstein's life is very full, and there are many books that are this thick on Einstein, and I can't do that in 45 minutes or an hour if I overrun a little bit. But I will hopefully show you some things that you might not be too familiar with. Well, where was he born? In the beginning, you might be surprised that he had difficulty in talking. I have run across children like this that cannot communicate verbally with their parents. It's pointing and gestures and grunts. And in this case, of course, we know the outcome. Einstein being the genius he was. So you see there, it was his younger sister that acted as an intermediary to communicate Einstein's wishes to his parents. And there's a picture of him 3. No, it lasted longer than that. In fact, it lasted up until he was 9 years old. So there was something going on in Einstein's brain that made verbal communications difficult. But of course, as you see, other things came out. Now, he did get expelled from school. This is one of the urban legends. It is true. And you see the quote there. And I wonder if this headmaster lived to see Einstein in his famous days, because look what he said. This little boy will never amount to anything. Well, he certainly did amount to something. This is his matriculation certificate. Gosh, it's out of focus, unfortunately. This area here, where I'm highlighting with my pointer, there are the number 6s next to, you might see it clearer on the side screens, you'll see the number 6s next to the mathematical subjects. 6 wasn't low, 6 was high. So this is one of the misconceptions that followed Einstein. When people looked at this, they thought, oh, he got 6, he failed. He didn't. The worst mark here was here, 3, that was for French, but there's a dash through English, and in fact, Einstein's English was never that good, as you will hear yourself a little bit later. Person in his class not to get a job. That sounds bad. There were 5 people in the class. This is the letter that describes his diploma with the other people in the class. His first dissertation, which he did in 1901, which unfortunately no copy remains. It would be so interesting to read this, because in this dissertation he sharply criticized the works of pillars of science of the time. Boltzmann there, a very famous one, was criticized by Einstein, and of course this thesis was rejected as that of the crackpot. So he got himself a job in the Swiss Patent Office. You've probably heard this. He starts there in 1902, and again he's not qualified. You see there the quote, technically unqualified to be a government clerk. Wasn't very good with rules and regulations, liked to do his own thing, liked to think, so no, wasn't an industrious patent clerk in the opinion of the interviewer. But nonetheless, he got the job because there were some strings that were pulled for him to get this job. So there he is, he gets, all right, let's turn to his personal life. Some of this you may be familiar with, some of it you may not be. This is his first wife, Mileva, and they had an affair before, they were intimate before, and she got pregnant and gave birth to a girl out of wedlock. That was in 1902. Her name was Liesel. Nobody quite knows what happened to Liesel. She disappears out of history's records. There are several theories. Most likely she died from scarlet fever at the age of 21 months. And nobody knew about this until 30 years after his death. So that was a well-kept secret. Second marriage. So, the first one fell apart, and he gets married to Elsa. But before he does that, he actually considered marrying Elsa's daughter, who was 18 years younger. She very sensibly wanted nothing to do with him. Although she did like him, she did consider him as a paternal figure, there was no romantic involvement between the two. So he did end up marrying Elsa, and as you see, first cousin. This is a picture of her daughter taken on a boat that I extracted from one of the family albums I found. That was his first choice. Now, he wasn't faithful. It came out in the letters that were revealed to the public after his death. I'll talk more about the letters later, that he played around. And here are some of the names of the women that he played around with. About 10. Some of them were coded in his letters just by initials, although they've been subsequently identified, and you'll see a couple of the identities there. One of these women was actually associated with the Soviet Union and was suspected of have been a spy. More on that later when we get to the FBI report. Okay, did you know he was a smoker? Well, the picture's down there, pretty obvious. He's generally got a pipe in his mouth. He actually was an advocate of smoking, which was, well, I guess they didn't know in those days what we know now, but he was an advocate of smoking, and he used it to help him think, actually. This is a picture of his pipe, which is in the Smithsonian, and he was also a musician. Let's drop the sound a little. This is him playing violin. He played violin and piano. Again, it helped him think, and he would often do benefit concerts. Now let's turn to his fame and how he got it. So in 1905, he published 4 spectacular papers, which we will summarize briefly here. First one is light is made out of particles, not waves. Particles, little wave packets. The next one he did was particles in fluids. I'll show you an example of that one. Then in June was special relativity, and then in September was the very famous E = mc squared. However, in 1914, he's got the world's best job. He's a full professor at Berlin University with no teaching duties. He is the director of a new Institute of Physics, where he doesn't actually have to be there. And he's also a member of the Prussian Academy of Science with absolutely no responsibilities whatsoever. He's picking up 3 salaries. By the way, this job doesn't exist anymore, so don't bother applying. From the Times on November the 7th in 1919, they ran that 3-deck banner headline. Those are the words that they used. And overnight, everybody knew who Einstein was. He became instantly famous. He got invitations and honors from everywhere. Photographers were always trying to take pictures of him. There's an example there. Many magazines wanted to tell his story, and everybody thought he was the bee's knees. Overnight. Now let's turn to his politics. You may not be aware of his politics. He was known as an anti-war activist post-1914. He was a pacifist. He was a cultural Zionist. He was definitely anti-Nazi, and he was also part of the US civil rights movement. He was an activist there. You may not know he was offered the presidency of Israel. 1952, he was offered the Israeli presidency, but he actually rejected it, turned it down, said he's sorry, I can't do it. And you see him there on the left, sitting with Ben-Gurion. Let's talk about his discoveries very briefly. So, as I mentioned earlier, the only lab he had was a pad and a pen and that desk. Everything he discovered, and the text you see on the screen is his writing from his papers, everything came from his brain. He just sat there and thought. He did thought experiments, put them down on paper, refined them, published them. Amazing man. One thing he did not discover is the cone. Clearly. And really, was it this easy? You can't read it there. It's E equals MA squared crossed out, E equals MB squared crossed out, and E equals MC squared. Oh, that works. And that is the root of that. That is a hydrogen bomb. All right, Einstein was looking for the unified theory. He wanted to put all the four forces together, the strong, the weak, the electromagnetic, and the gravitational force together. He searched for this, and this is what he did until his death. He never found a solution for it, and to date, nobody has. Gravity still has to be included into a unified theory. Then, of course, we get to 18th of April, 1955, and he passes away. These are some headlines about him passing in the newspapers. This is his desk, taken mere hours after he died. Some enterprising photographer dashed into the university, took a picture of his office. As you can see, he wasn't the tidiest of persons. His desk is covered with papers there. He and I share that. We must be related somewhere. You may not know this, that Einstein was cremated, only not all of him. There were some bits taken away. The first bit I'll tell you about is his eyes. His eyes were removed by his ophthalmologist, and they were kept. And to this day, as far as I know, I haven't been able to find out anything more about this, they are still in a New Jersey bank vault. And the owner died. Dr. Abrams, who was the ophthalmologist who removed the eyes from Einstein, kept them. This is not a picture of his eyes, by the way. It's just an example of how they were put into some kind of jar. And nobody knew about it until fairly recently. Then there was his brain. His brain was also removed from the body, and nobody knew that until 1986. This is actually a picture of his brain. And his brain does have some different structures compared to the normal brain, but we don't understand whether that means anything. What we would have to do is collect a bunch of geniuses after they die, remove their brains, and see if there was anything in common between them. So, there's a very interesting story about what happened to his brain too. It's in this box here, this book here, Driving Mr. Albert. A little bit of background here. So over on the left, this is a young woman, 19 years old. I'll get to her in a second. Here she is at 69 years old. She is believed, it was believed that she was perhaps an illegitimate daughter of Einstein via a ballerina, who I couldn't find out the name of. The purpose of this drive across the country with Einstein's brain in the boot of the car, sloshing around in preserving liquid, was to extract DNA and do a DNA match between her and the brain to see if there was a relationship. Unfortunately, the brain had degraded so badly that there was no DNA extracted from it, and it proved to be a failure. So we don't actually know whether she was an illegitimate daughter or not of Albert. Her name was Evelyn, and as an aside, she was married to Grover Krantz. You may not have heard of Grover Krantz. Why is Grover significant? Grover was a firm believer that the Sasquatch existed, tried to prove it. But of more interest, if you ever want to see Grover, he is on display in the Smithsonian with his Irish wolfhound. This is it here. This is Grover Krantz, and that is his Irish wolfhound. Little sidebar. Then the FBI report. 1,800 pages on Albert. You see, it's freely available now. I actually did open it up and have a look at some of it. You can get it on the internet. And as you see, this is part 1 of 9 parts. Part of the reason he was not invited to join in the Manhattan Project was from this file, this investigation by Hoover. As you see there, Hoover sent a letter to the army saying that he was not a person to be trusted. They thought that Einstein's apartment was a communist center, you see that, and that the country house was a hiding place of Moscow envoys. It was never proved. They finally closed the file. They couldn't prove anything. I mean, Albert was not anti-US at all. I think he was very grateful to have been given haven in the USA, given opportunities to work and develop his theories in the United States. So, in conclusion, Albert Einstein, and that's of course why he's person of the 20th century, has revolutionized our understanding of atoms. He proved that atoms existed. He revolutionized our understanding of light through his papers, which gave us all those inventions that I've talked to you about: DVDs, CDs, lasers. We now have a better understanding of how gravity works, although we still don't know. And you see the other things there that he is to be commended for in improving mankind's knowledge in a wide range of subjects. 4 landmark papers basically did this. Let me conclude with his own words. The difference between genius and stupidity is that genius has its limits. It brings me to the end of a brief biography of Albert.